Hey everyone, not long ago, I published a video where I said that between myself and my wife, we would collect more than $5 million in Social Security benefits. Now I know that's a huge number, and there were a lot of comments on that video that called my numbers into question. They said there's no way that anyone will ever get more than $5 million in Social Security benefits. Some of them had their own calculations, but all of the commenters wanted one thing: to see the math behind my numbers. There's no way Social Security can pay out that kind of money, they said. So today, I'm going to show you how under our current law, my wife and I could receive, it's actually nearly $6 million in benefits. Now, I think it's really important, though, to say right here at the front that my purpose for this video was not to boast about my earnings history or how much I would eventually collect. It's actually quite the opposite. You know, when the system was built, FDR said that it was built to give some measure of protection to the average citizen and to his family against the loss of a job and against poverty-ridden old age. But since then, that system has been growing. In fact, it's been growing what I think is way too fast. You know, in 1950, the Social Security program took up 1.8% of the federal budget, and in 2023, that's now 21%. That's the single highest item in the entire budget. Now, I'd love to hear from you in the comments if that surprises you, if that's a bigger piece of the federal spending pie than you thought it was. You know, I know it's more than national defense, more than Medicare, more than the interest they're having to pay out on the trillions of dollars in bonds that they've issued for the government spending. It's high. You know, when this system was created, it was purely an anti-poverty program, but now it has swollen to become a government-sponsored retirement plan. So I don't think it's any wonder that it's in trouble, and despite the attempts by lawmakers over the years to fix it, it continues to have issues with solvency. So just why is it growing so fast? How did it get from 1.8% to 21% of the federal budget? Well, one of the reasons is how the program has changed over the past few decades. You know, now we have spousal benefits, survivor benefits, children's benefits, and the one that slipped in that didn't seem all that big, the annual adjustments for inflation. This is what's driving the system to get bigger and bigger and bigger until people like me are going to be collecting millions of dollars in benefit payments. So just a quick refresher here before I dive into the math about how I stand to collect nearly $6 million in benefits. So to keep up with inflation, the Social Security system uses two types of inflation measurements to help ensure that benefit payments reflect the general rise in the standard of living. They use wage inflation as measured by the average wage index and price inflation as measured by a certain version of the consumer price index. Now, the version of inflation that is used depends on where you are in the timeline. That hinge point is your eligibility year, which is the year you die, become disabled, or turn 62. Now, prior to your eligibility year, your benefits are inflated by changes to wages, and specifically, it's the average wage index. But beginning with your eligibility year, they are inflated with price inflation. And it's been this way since the 1977 Social Security amendments. But the problem is that since this system has been put into place, wages have grown faster than prices. Now, I know that some people don't believe that, but we have to base this on the data that's available, and that's the average wage index for the increase to wages and the consumer price index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, often called the CPI-W. That's the price inflation piece. And when we look at that data, you can see that in most years, wages did grow faster than prices. And if we average it out, wages have grown at an average of 4.28%, and prices have grown at an average of 3.59%. Now, I know it's easy to look at the difference in those two numbers and think, there's no way that a change of that amount could make a sizable difference in the longevity of the Social Security Trust Fund, and that's why it's growing so fast. Well, it does. In fact, the Social Security Board of Trustees looked at the impact of changing the whole system back to only increasing benefits tied to price inflation, because it's growing slower, and it found that if it were put into place starting in 2029, it would solve 80% of the long-term shortfall, and by the 75th year, it would put the Social Security Trust Fund at 172% surplus. So not only would this fix the program, it would ensure that it was there for future generations. And obviously the best part is you didn't hear anything about tax increases or benefit cuts in that. Now, I did go into detail about that in the video that I released not long ago called The Simple Social Security Fix That No One Is Talking About. So if you want to find out more about the details on how this change would actually work, who it would affect, and so on, you can watch that video next. So let's jump into the math. There were really two issues here. First, people took issue with the fact that I'd planned to live out to age 95. Now, I'm going to cover that in another video. I don't even want to get into that here, but when you dive into the numbers on life expectancy, you'll quickly realize that you have to look at more than just the headline number. But for those of you who think Devin will never live to 95, that's okay, because I'm going to show you the other numbers as well. And let me tell you, even the numbers for a life expectancy at 80 or 85 are shocking. But the big problem that people had was my assertion that my wife and I could collect just over $5.5 million in Social Security benefits. Now, I get it. This is a flabbergasting number, and it almost sounds like we hit the lottery. But I promise you, this number is real. And if you want to know how this is going to happen, you got to understand how the current system works. So stay with me. So let's take it back to 2008. I was still a baby financial advisor and a tender 32 years old. But at that point, I'd already been in the business for a few years. Now, that year, the maximum wage base was $102,000. That's the level of my earnings in 2008 that would have been subject to Social Security taxes. Now, every year, the wage base is adjusted if the average wage index increases. So in 2009, the wage base increased to $106,800, and it actually stayed there for 3 years before it started moving again. So let's just assume that my earnings were at that level or beyond for each year after that, because those are the only earnings that would actually be counted in the calculation for Social Security benefits. Because, yeah, I'm not paying taxes beyond that amount, but those earnings beyond that amount also are not being used in that formula for my future benefit. Now, we know what the numbers are on that maximum taxable wage base all the way up until 2024, but for all the years after that, we have to make some assumptions. Now, I'm sticking with a fairly conservative assumption that the average wage increases we've experienced since 1978 will continue. So this means that the maximum taxable wage base will increase by 4.28% per year, all the way up until I plan to retire at the end of my 66th year, which should come about the end of 2042. Now, this just happens to be exactly 35 years of earnings, and this is actually very likely going to be the earnings that are used for my benefit calculation. But when they calculate my benefits, they aren't going to use my earnings at face value. No, they're going to inflate them by using an indexing factor. This is meant to take the earnings that are years old and increase them up to how much that amount of earnings would be in today's dollars. And how do they determine what the indexing factors are? You may have guessed it, wage inflation. So when I go out to the Social Security Administration's website and get my indexing factors, my 2008 earnings are multiplied by just over 2.6, which results in an index earning of $269,271. And it's this amount that will be used in the benefits formula. And that indexing continues on all the way until my age 59. Now, any earnings after age 59 at 60 and beyond are used at face value, so they don't get indexed. Now, there are a few other little factors that would be part of this calculation, like the recalculation of benefits as I get those additional earnings, but I don't want to go into detail about that because they don't change the end result. So basically, when I'm finished working, my highest 35 years of indexed earnings would be summed up and then divided by the number of months in 35 years, which is 420. Now, they do this to come up to a figure they call averaged index monthly earnings, or AIM. So when you add that up, divide by 420, it comes to $23,301. Now that we have this number, we simply need to apply that to the formula. Now here's the other part. This formula is made up of two parts, and you may have heard of these referred to as bin points. And much like everything else in Social Security land, they change almost every year. And guess what makes them change? You probably guessed it. The year-over-year changes to the average wage index. So again, we know what the numbers are for 2024, so we can simply inflate those by the average amount of wage inflation since 1978 and see that the two bin points would be $2,111 and $12,727. Now, the way this formula works is that you take those averaged index monthly earnings, and for me, that was $23,301. And for the amount of averaged earnings up to the first bin point, you multiply by 90%. So when we do that, we get $1,900. And then for earnings between the first and second bin point, you multiply by 32%. So that would be just over $10,600 multiplied by 32 for a result of $3,397 roughly. And then finally, anything over the second bin point is multiplied by 15%. So that calculation gives us $1,586. Now, you have to add them up. And when you do, that gives me a full retirement age benefit of $6,883. But remember, that was calculated by the formula that was in place the year I turned 62. So now we have to go back and add the cost of living adjustments to increase that between 62 and my current age, 67. And this is where price inflation kicks in. Now, we're not going to use some outrageous number here. We're going to assume that the average cost of living increase is 2.5% per year. When you add those all the way up to my full retirement age of 67, that means that my full retirement age benefit would be $7,787. Now, in keeping with my conservative assumptions, I'm going to assume that the same cost of living increases will happen after that as well. In addition, I'm also going to assume that my wife will receive a benefit of exactly 1/2 of mine as a spousal benefit. That means that in the first year, if you add up all of our benefits, we'll receive just over $137,000 in benefit payments. The next year that goes up as it does the next year and the next year and the next year. And if you start to keep up with a running balance of the amount of benefits that we've received, by the time we've hit 73, that's just over $1 million in benefit payments. By 80, that's over $2.3 million. By 85, it's $3.3 million. By 90, it's $4.5 million. And by 95, it's nearly $5.9 million. And get this, I will have paid in $839,672 in Social Security taxes. And it's only that high because I'm self-employed. If I was an employee, it would be half of that. That means that if I file at 67, I'll have received back all of my money by the time I'm 72. And if I would have been an employee and paid half of that, I would have gotten back all of my money at 69. So that's not too shabby for a program that's meant to protect against poverty in old age. Sounds like I won't have to worry about being in poverty. Now, the truth is, do I really expect to collect a few million from Social Security? Absolutely not. I think the changes they'll make to the system are likely going to exclude people who are my age and earnings level. I think if you're 55 and up, you don't have anything to worry about. But I do think that those under 55 should likely start to do their plan without that if they have a high level of savings. There's just going to be a penalty for having a large amount of savings there. But again, looking at my earnings certainly wasn't the point of this video. What I did want to clearly illustrate is just how fast the system is growing and how change is not a possibility. Something is going to happen. Whatever that is, I'll be right here keeping you informed. So if you haven't subscribed yet, you probably should. Thanks so much for watching.